Hi, fellows. I have the pleasure to be here with you all. Bonita, know it. My name is Ian Gonzalez Pasco. I'm an MEM. I'm really proud of being here to keep merging all this network of these channels because these are doers for sure. And we just need to continue expanding our networks. Thank you, Dr. Jan, for making this happen. So anyways, I will let you with this beautiful panel that started the starting of this presentation of this beautiful work that all these beautiful people have been putting together with the beautiful mentors and faculty of the MEM program. So my pleasure to be here with Diego, the zero waste man for sure, because I can't beat this one, but we work together.
Thank you, Jan, for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to our community presentations. My name is Diego Sanchez, and I'll be introducing our panel this morning. I'm so excited to be joined here with these three amazing colleagues. Each of them are strong in all forms of the word. They are passionate. They are driven in the work they do, and they are undoubtedly the next world leaders. They are Michelle Wilk, Lizzie Hartson, and Aurora Flynn. To understand how our individual presentations on mines, mindful, lands, and landfill all share this common theme, we must first explain what is meant by tending transitions. We can recognize how successfully environmental issues such as climate resiliency, land management, mine reclamation, and resource depletion are through transitions in industry, technological advances, and socioeconomic systems. These wicked problems don't have one technical solution. There is no one absolute solution to any of these problems, but rather they all require a shift in paradigm. Tending transitions is how we move to a new kind of socio-ecological system. Put simply, we need to change the interaction between society and the environment. Our projects are linked by the way we adapt and transform the paradigm in our respective topics. These transitions can be enhanced by tending transitions. These transitions can be tended by enhancing capitals. Those include knowledge, human, natural, as well as others listed on the screen. However, there can be facets to these limitations, including these transitions, including the technical, the ecological, and socio-ecological, which should all be acknowledged for a just transition. Within these facets, there can be further limitations such as mindsets, lack of knowledge, lack of natural resources, and connectivity. As environmental leaders throughout our research, we know the path, we know the direction we need to head, but oftentimes the path can be a little lost or unsure. We do, however, know that these aspects include trust, knowledge, community empowerment, community engagement, and with these aspects we can make progress towards these transitions. Each of our projects spans across multiple scales, including the university, the county, the city, state, and society. With that, we will now present each of us on our respective topics on how each of us strong leaders respond to these wicked problems through tending transitions. Thank you. Driving the Zero Waste Movement. I'm here today to share with you my journey to zero waste. My journey starts before I can actually remember it, and actually I started piecing things together as the years have gone by. I could start my story at a number of places. I could tell the story of why I wear these Crocs, very zero waste presentation. If you want to know that, you can ask me any questions at the end. I could start throughout my childhood explaining things, explaining my adventures in playing outside. But instead, I'm going to start with my running career. My passion for running led me here today. Running gave me perspective. So I spent about 10 years of my life running, mile after mile, and I've run on the beaches of Florida, the plains of the Midwest, the mountains in Colorado, trails, parks, you name it. And the story's all the same. Pollution's everywhere. Running gave me opportunity. Before I started college, in high school, I didn't even consider college as an option. I got recruited to run at Allen Community College, and then after that, Kansas Wesleyan. Again, I say recruited to run, not to pursue an education. It wasn't until my junior year of college at Kansas Wesleyan that I really start connecting these dots on what was important to me. Running gave me perseverance. Mile after mile, day after day, it's exhausting, mentally, physically, emotionally. All of that together made me stronger as an individual. I believe in our field, this environmental field, we face a lot of challenges and obstacles to overcome. So having strength in all those forms really helps. It gave me time. Again, your zero waste journey, for me, was pieced together through self-reflection. Running gave me time to self-reflect. You know, spending hours by myself running, whatever it was, 8 miles in the morning or 18, you get a lot of time to think to yourself. And so as I was in the classroom learning about environmental studies and the problems of the world, I was also reflecting on them in the runs and thinking about what was important to me in my life. So why zero waste? To me, waste is a problem. It affects public health. There's public health concerns, environmental pollution in the land, air, and the water that we breathe, drink, and eat. Increased toxicity to vulnerable communities. Oftentimes, the way we handle waste, landfills, incinerators are located near vulnerable communities. Oftentimes, those are people of poverty and minority groups. Culture of overconsumption. We live in a world where it's easier to throw something away than it is to repair and fix it. We have people starving yet we waste food. We have finite resources sent to the landfill. We have so on and so on. The United States accounts for less than 5% of the world population, yet we consume 30% of the world's resources, and we produce 30% of the world's waste. So why Western? When I came to Western, I was really excited. Kansas is great, loved it, but environmental, it's not so much there. So when I came to Western and we had a strong culture of sustainability that I could hop onto, I was really excited. In 2017, when I joined, President Salisbury announced the zero waste commitment. He wanted to pursue zero waste by 2020, and where I found my need. The intended outcome. So my project, Driving the Zero Waste Movement, I wanted to build awareness, connect the waste problem to the individual, and identify institutional best practices. To me, the individual is the most important. Remember, you don't know what empowering somebody can do. I'm an example of that. I believe that by empowering people, sharing knowledge, sharing my values, that I don't know what they will become or what they will do. Some of you in this room can go on and listen to this presentation, start your zero waste journey, and from there, cause some real changes. And I will not know the magnitude of those. So project actions. I did a number of different projects on campus this past year and a half. So I'll explain just a few of them. Some of the actions are here on this side of the board. And then some of my intended outcomes are listed next to them. You can see how they correspond with each other. Project Green Challenge was one of the first initiatives I pursued last October. It was to build awareness. So Project Green Challenge covers 25 different environmental themes and empowers students, faculty, people like yourselves to go from consumer to conscious. So Project Green Challenge would explain what the issue is and how you can, in your own life, solve that. So, for example, in my undergraduate experience, I learned the issues of personal care products. There's a lot of toxins in them. There's a lot of very bad carcinogens in the products we use. Within Project Green Challenge, I found a solution, make my own deodorant. And so it provided a recipe, provided the reasons why. And so it was a really great initiative. We had over 100 Western students, actually over 100 people in the Western community apply and participate with this challenge. The lead office. So I would not have grown, I would not be the professional individual in front of you today if it was not for the lead office. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Sarah, for including me in the lead office team. I'm glad to be joined by my colleagues in the lead sustainability office. We did a lot of really cool things this year. Zero waste events is something we do. We go to events and we help divert waste, whether it's recycling and composting. Part of my job was mentoring. I got to walk through projects, work with undergraduates through projects they wanted to implement. Sustainability tours were conducted to show students the infrastructures on campus of sustainability and how they can participate with them. For example, taking them to Free Cycle, which is our on-campus thrift store, or showing them the Earth Tub and how that works, and soon to be the Rocket Composter. So the team is incredible. One of the big things we accomplished last year was they received a $139,000 grant to implement the Rocket Composter. This will be able to divert most food waste, I think up to 95% of food waste on campus. Zero waste kits I'm super excited about. We applied for the grant last spring and unveiled the project this year. The zero waste kits are reusable tableware products that clubs and organizations on campus can rent out for free instead of using single-use plastic. From December till now, my math is correct, we've rented out 1,700 kits. That's a lot of single-use plastic diverted from the landfill. The waste audit. This was really fun, but really exhausting. Well, in November of 2018, I had 30 volunteers, approximately 30 volunteers, and we dug through all the dumpsters on campus. We sorted through 3,400 pounds of trash in 4 days. It took over 150 volunteer hours. It was extremely stinky, extremely gross, but it was really fun. We jammed out, we danced, we found really cool things. I won't get to all the details of what we found, but it was definitely an eye-opening experience. We sorted waste into these categories: recyclables and Gunnison, landfill, reusables, organics, and contamination. Contamination referring to just outside, off-campus waste. Some of the results from that waste audit were Western produces 231,000 pounds of waste per year from the residential dumpsters. That's approximately, so residential dumpsters on campus get dumped 3 times a week. They generated 2,500 pounds in 2 days. That's how much waste we generate from the dumpsters. 148,000 pounds per academic year was found in the academic buildings, estimated from the academic buildings, and in total, in one academic year, we generate about 380,000 pounds of waste. That's, to put it in scale, a little bit less than 2 football fields, 1 foot deep, or 20 feet high in the skate park in the middle of campus. So, some of the numbers you can see here, these are the overall findings over here from the waste audit. So, the majority of waste was actually landfill. It was not recyclable. There was no way to divert it. And so these other numbers represent what was recyclable, what was compostable. And so there are some improvements to be made, but overall we have a really good waste diversion. In 2015, in the waste audit, it was estimated that Western diverts 24% of its waste. We now divert just under 35%. Some of the most common findings include fast food packaging. So fast food packaging, single-use plastics, processed food packaging, that really sends a message to kind of what people are putting in their bodies, right? Just, it's wrapped in plastic, it's wrapped in trash, and itself isn't of good quality either. So just think about that. You know, why are students not cooking more? Is it lack of infrastructure? Is it lack of knowledge? You know, what is it? One of my final and most important actions was the roadmap to zero waste. So in 2015, Dr. Bookmoran's class, actually MEM graduates, created this roadmap to zero waste. Based on my waste audit, I revised this document, and I just include the next steps that Western should pursue in order to pursue zero waste. Some of the examples include the department certification. Eon helped with that. Lauren Ahon, I don't know if he's in here. They helped create that, and the lead students have been working on that throughout the year. They're hoping to initiate that next semester. The Green Department certification is basically how do departments on campus increase their sustainability. We want to really create this culture of sustainability from the students to the faculty and staff. Another initiative I was able to accomplish, and that's included in the roadmap, is hand dryers. So in the 2015 edition of this document, they noted that in Paul Wright Gym, the majority of trash came from paper towel usage. And so as part of that, as part of my project, I worked with Brooke Moran, Bryce Hanna, and Martin Ammett to install two new electric hand dryers in the Paul Wright Gym that'll hopefully engage students to start using that more and just reduce paper waste as well. Some of the next steps in continuing research. So my vision for the document is not for it to sit on a desk like the MEM states. We want for it to actually get used. So my goal is to let the lead office students, the people in the Sustainable Action Committee, and faculty and staff in the EMS programs to give it to students or faculty to implement these solutions. So I want a capstone student in the EMS program to look at the roadmap and say, I can do that on campus. That's my project. I want people in lead office to say, okay, this is what we can work on next. You know, what projects we're going to take on. And so that is the purpose of that roadmap. I really want it to be used, and I think that we can make a lot of changes on campus with that. It is important to note that in my report, I mentioned that we need to green Western supply chain. So waste is a problem, and there are two ways to kind of stop that, diversion and aversion. And so we live in a world where it's a very linear economy. We make, take, and waste. We discard waste very quickly. Recycling economy, it kind of pauses that system, but more or less things end up in the landfill. We really need to transition to a circular economy. And so in my report, I mentioned how Western can make some steps to source more sustainable options that don't end up leaving Western to deal with the waste. We want companies to be responsible for their own products. We want Pepsi to not require students to use a single-use cup in Mad Jacks. I want to leave you all with this quote. Zero waste is much more than zero or less of something. Yes, it's creating less waste, but when you really consider it, zero waste means more wildlife, more prosperity, more life. We as a planet are getting more by choosing zero waste. That is a quote that I started in India with Dr. John. I explored the waste problem out there last summer. And lastly, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Brooke Moran, for my mentor, lead sustainability team, Sarah Phillips, Nathan King, Janice Wellborn. Thank you all for your participation in my zero waste journey. And just know that you have all you are all part of my journey, and I hope that I'm a part of yours, whether you're years or minutes into it. Thank you.
With
that, I'll take some questions.
So just a reference, I went to a Green Build conference in Europe in Amsterdam in March. Everything that you were talking about going into a circular economy is directly involved with the Green Build Council. So I don't know if you know who that is, but we do have one in America. We have a US Green Build Council, and throughout the whole entire world, there is a World Green Build Council as well, but they talk all about the zero waste, becoming the circular economy, and using proper materials to be building with. So
Awesome.
Reference for you to take up.
Thank you for that. I'll have to remember that. Ethan.
Diego, great job, man. Super proud of you. Glad to be a part of what I've been a part of with you. As individuals, what can we do to contribute most to zero waste? Is it individual choices or is it collectivizing for policy?
So for me, I said, thank you for that question. I said I focus on the individual because by educating you on how to reduce your waste, you can now go on to your next job, and maybe you do work on a policy, right? You see that there's no recycling there, or there's an excess amount of waste in whatever product you're creating, your growing operations, right? I guess, by your personal decision could be to implement a policy, right? Or it could just be to change your personal habits. You know the power of just having conversations around zero waste, and how now in your head you can't get that when you throw something away, you think of me and you're like, wow. I'm so ashamed. I've gotten that so many times that like just planting that seed that we're so wasteful, I think gets people just all their actions, they start thinking about ways to reduce that waste. And so for you, if it is an individual decision that comes from it, great. But if it's something more than that, pursue it, right? Yeah.
Following that question that is very interesting, also I want to add that I think we're in the time and the moment about marketing. And because it's trendy, right, not to be a zero waste or having your own reusable cup or just decrease and say like, my birthday kids is gonna be zero waste for your own cups and stuff. That's like, wow, that's amazing. So what I think our generations and so on needs to do is more than marketing, market it in the way of green build system, that kind of things. It can be great marketed, and that's you make it trending and make it companies to make decisions and so on. So now my question. Okay, I saw that 230,000 pounds were collected as an average here in Western, right?
So that was estimated from the calculations that I collected. So 2,500 per pickup for a total of for that.
Yeah, I just if using that data, to 2,300 students living on campus, right?
It's closer to 950, I think, residential students.
900?
Residential students, yes. Enrolled, about 2,000.
Residential students. Anyways, I just divided that amount, and it was like 10 pounds per student living on campus per day.
Yes.
And I'm like, my God, so what's going on? Freshmen are the one that comes here and they receive the first education, so they're producing 10 pounds per day of waste, and so residentials.
I wanna tweak your math a bit. Based on my numbers, it's actually Western students generate 7.6 pounds of waste per week. And so it is still a lot. The average is 4.5 a day. And so we do a really good job of diverting waste here on campus, but yes, it still is a lot of waste. CJ?
Diego, could you maybe enlighten us on the recent changes with China taking our recycling and how that might affect recycling efforts in the U.S. And just kind of enlighten us on what might kind of happen in the next few years?
So I had conversations with Nathan King about this, and he states that luckily Western sends their waste in the United States. So we have places throughout the U.S. that we send our waste to. We're already limited by the infrastructure we have here, and so The China ban did restrict the amount of plastics that overall can be recycled. It didn't have too many effects at Western, but we're definitely going to need to see a shift in the products we create and consume, because it was already not a sustainable solution sending it to China, but we definitely need to stop that waste from being generated. And that's all the time I have. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, I'm just going to move right into it. First of all, good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Michelle Wilk, and I currently serve as the Outreach Director for High Country Conservation Advocates. And before I get into the nuts and bolts of my project and what I've accomplished in the past year, I wanted to share a story about how I began my journey in Gunnison. And this particular story really resonates with me. As you can see here, I have a photo of the painted wall of Black Canyon. And I'll take you back 2 years ago. I had just moved to Gunnison. My parents had helped me bring all my stuff up here. We spent a long day driving, a long day unpacking, and then we took a break to go out to the Black Canyon. And we made our way along the top to all the viewpoints. And I don't remember which particular viewpoint it was, but my parents started making their way back to the car, and I was just standing out there, taking it in, and I heard something. And I kind of looked around and was like, oh, you know, maybe there's a critter down there, or a squirrel, or I don't know, something's moving around. And I just continued to breathe and take it all in. And then I heard some more noise. And then I really started to wonder, like, what's happening down there? And lo and behold, in that moment that I was standing out there, 2 people just summited the face of the wall, climbing. And this is really important to my story because I come from a place that doesn't really have access to public land. So I stood there pretty much in shock and awe of, like, wondering why, how, oh my gosh, okay. And I think it provides a really useful story because it really illustrates where I began my journey in Gunnison County and how I began to understand the culture of Gunnison, how people relate to public lands, how they interact with public lands in a way that I had not been exposed to before. So fast forward to a year later, I made my way into the MEM program, and I was fortunate to secure a position with High Country Conservation Advocates. And quickly within the scope of my position, we identified a project working with the staff and the director, and HICA basically told me that they needed a stewardship program. And I wasn't a public lands expert by any means. I had spent the first year of MEM really understanding what public lands were and why they were so important to Gunnison County. But we identified some initial project goals in terms of researching existing stewardship efforts, figuring out what best practices were, establishing a program that would suit the mission of HICA while also serving our public lands, and then designing some follow-up accountability methods to ensure proper data gathering, monitoring, so that we could always be improving. But HICA really identified this need organizationally because at that point, we didn't really have a great method to really physically engage people on public lands, and in our technical work, we found that was falling short. So it provided a really unique opportunity to expand the mission of the organization. And beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about what stewardship is and why it's important on public lands. So in a nutshell, stewardship is caring for something. It's tending, it's managing something in a way to meet particularly identified goals. And in terms of public lands, because you can steward a number of things, public lands provide or illustrate a huge need, especially in Gunnison County with over 80% of our land, or 80% of our county are public lands. And so in essence, we could never have enough stewardship, and especially given the pressures facing public lands, such as climate change, stewardship capacity and funding, tourism and development, which is always increasing and in a variety of forms, and then an ever-shifting dynamic federal policy that carries great weight and influence on how our lands are managed and what we're seeing on our public lands. So with that, my next step was really to evaluate what was already happening in Gunnison County. And we're really fortunate because we have a lot of great organizations that are already pursuing stewardship within our county, and specifically on public lands. You may be familiar with groups like Crested Butte Mountain Bike Association or Gunnison Trails, who use a recreation-based model to steward, build, maintain trails, which also enhances public lands by mitigating those recreational impacts. We also have some more specific long-term opportunities like the Gunnison Wetland Meadows Restoration Resilience Project, which is, it's been going on for 6 or 7 years, and their primary focus is actually to ensure wetland restoration, which provides greater habitat for our endangered sage-grouse species. It also prevents erosional impacts on the land. But aside from that, we really have a lot of one-off, one-day projects, community cleanups, which are extremely important as well. And then we have been seeing in the past couple of years a push through the County Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee and the Gunnison County Stewardship Fund to try to formulate a more cohesive plan for stewardship. But even in this model, the outcomes are really focused on sustaining tourism and recreation in the economy, which again is essential to where we are and who we are as a community, but it left me wondering what sort of stewardship opportunities existed strictly for the sake of the environment and strictly for the sake of enhancing resilience outside of any sort of outcome based on recreation, the economy, or tourism. So in my research of best practices, I quickly identified a need within our program that I wanted to create, that we really needed to focus on education, engagement, and inspiration. And I sought to do this through 3 different programmatic elements that would fulfill those different programmatic goals, which would include a program focused on environmental education, summer stewardship, and HICA Next Gen Advocates. And unfortunately, while I won't have the time to go through each one of these in detail, I do want to focus here on the summer stewardship element, which we've created and which we'll launch this summer. And the target is to be able to engage the general Gunnison County population and to reach members of the community who may not be mountain bikers or rock climbers or any other, or may not be involved in any other number of extreme sports, and who may just need an outlet to get out on public lands, learn about them, and give back, essentially. And so the intended outcomes for this were really to engage the community and fulfill the mission of HICA in a physical sense. And we are really excited that we're going to be launching 4 different events this summer in collaboration with many partners, federal, nonprofit, and educational partners as well. Again, I don't have enough time to go through each of these projects in detail, but they do span from trail restoration to pulling invasives and also mitigating impacts from illegal user created routes that are kind of popping up everywhere all over our public lands. If you have specific questions about these events, I encourage you to ask me at the end. In terms of what else I've accomplished and what I've really come to learn in this experience through MEM and in my opportunity to work for HICA is that even though this project started out as being about creating a stewardship program for HICA, it became so much more. And I learned so much more and about the importance of stewarding the self and also stewarding an organization that's been operating in Gunnison County for over 4 decades. And so how do you do that mission justice, that messaging? How do you continue to increase the relevancy of that messaging and stress the importance of that organization's work in the community? And so these are just a number of other things I was able to accomplish both in terms of the stewardship program and my general position working for HICA. And I've been fortunate to learn a number of lessons through all of these different project elements. And so now I want to talk a little bit about ongoing research that I plan to complete over the summer. Originally, I intended to complete this research during the year, but summer provided a much better opportunity to gather data that seemed much more effective in terms of what I was looking at. And so up here, you'll see a model from Bennett et al. It was published in 2018. And essentially, his model of local environmental stewardship stressed that actors, motivations, capacity, and actions all have to be taken into consideration when we're looking at environmental outcomes. And that in any given context of where environmental stewardship can occur, it's not going to be the same formula for each community. There's always going to be limitations, and you're always going to have to take into consideration the unique characteristics of where you're working, who you're working with, what their motivations and capacity may be given that environment. And so with that, it really left me wondering, well, what's driving stewardship in Gunnison County now? We're incredibly fortunate to have so many organizations already working on stewardship, and we have people who are already engaged in these projects and who we are going to continue to engage through the summer. So understanding what's bringing them out there instead of making assumptions about it is really critical to ensuring that we have science and data that will guide our marketing efforts, our engagement efforts, and how we continue to encourage the greater community, regardless of their connection to public lands, to participate in stewarding our public lands. And so what I've proposed for the summer is a Q-sort analysis to understand the values, motivations, and capacity of public lands. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about this. So what a Q-sort analysis is. A Q-sort, or this model, was created back in the 30s, and essentially the model seeks to understand views and perspectives of a given population. And so it's used across disciplines. There's a lot of environmental research that's been used within this Q-sort model, or using this Q-sort model. And essentially what you have is a grid. And you first do a lot of research and understand your community and what their general views are on a given topic. So in this case, it's public land stewardship. So what do people think about that? What are their potential intrinsic, extrinsic motivations, capacity, actions, outcomes, all of which stem from the stewardship model that we saw on the previous page. And so the idea is that you are able to survey a given group of participants. So in this case, I would look to survey participants who have already participated in stewardship. So I'd go out to events, ask them to complete this sort, and they would have 34 statements to sort on this grid. And the benefit of having them sort the statements on this grid is it's going to force them to compare what is more important and what is less important to them. And so while all of it may be important, you're going to gain understanding of what are the general, what are the similarities and differences, both across all the participants and within groups. So if we wanted to focus on rec-based stewardship versus non-rec-based stewardship, we might be able to understand, well, what's driving people to participate in rec-based stewardship? Is it intrinsic motivations? Is it because they're getting free pizza? Is it because they're excited about the outcomes, or is it because their livelihood depends on those outcomes? And so this model actually has a lot of benefits that a traditional survey isn't going to yield in terms of understanding the data. So in a traditional survey, if you have all of these given questions about your motivations, they answer those in a singular format. And so even though you can take that information one by one, you can't necessarily understand which one is more important than another if they both rate it on the same Likert scale. So this model allows you to draw some more conclusions, and it's incredibly important because of the vast differences in how we use public lands and how people connect with public lands. So if we're really trying to create a model for stewardship that's going to engage vast populations and encourage all users to participate, where can we find similarities in what's driving them? What's different about what's driving them? And how can we use that to engage different populations to come together on projects? And so I've identified a number of different projects this summer, including the projects that HICA will be participating in or hosting in terms of our summer stewardship program. And I'm hoping to disseminate this Q-sort to at least 50 to 60 participants and really just have a start to understanding and collecting data that is specific to Gunnison County stewardship. Because despite all of the efforts that are going on right now, we really don't know what is driving people to go to events for Simba or to go to the Wet Meadows Restoration Resilience Project. What is really catching their attention, and how do we use that information to our advantage to better steward our public lands? So with that, I have a lot of other things I'd love to elaborate on, so please ask me questions. But first, I really wanted to take some time to thank some people who were just so vital in my success in this program and really coming into my new life here in Gunnison. So first of all, High Country Conservation Advocates, I'd like to thank our staff, Brett, Matt, and Julie, and our board of directors for their patience, their opportunity that they provided me, and just really allowing me to balance grad school and this new position and providing so many learning opportunities. The MEM program as a whole, thank you to all the faculty and staff, but specifically to Suzanne, my mentor, and for helping me understand that what I do now is enough, and I should always take time to appreciate that here. And also my project partners who are partnering with this summer, the Forest Service, Wilderness Pursuits, who's really guided a lot of our research on how we're going to spearhead the HICA Next Gen Advocates section of the stewardship program, Tom Grant and the Wet Meadows Restoration Team, the Center for Public Lands for allowing us to partner on the cheatgrass project, and to all my family and friends who were there with me for all of my breakdowns and freakouts and reminding me that I was doing great work. So thank you so much for all your support. All right, so with that, questions, Ian.
Fantastic. I think that model for me is a new model. I didn't know that Q sort model, and I will for sure go into deep in that. I think, okay, excellent. About the 4 events that's going to happen this summer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they happening at the same time? Who is coordinating each of them?
Sure.
Volunteer outreach?
Yeah, of course. So the 4 events we've identified that we can take on this summer start. The first one's actually next weekend, and it's a cheatgrass pull day with Center for Public Lands and and even though the event isn't happening on public lands, we felt that there was a huge nexus to public lands because of the way that cheatgrass can be spread onto public lands, and so that was really important for us. And it was also important to increase our presence in Gunnison and our connections with the university. So we're really excited about that. The U.S. Forest Service we're partnering with on a few projects. So trail restoration at Lily Lake. Ideally, we're going to be focused on trail work that's at a nexus to wilderness because our mission really supports wilderness areas, our organizational mission through HICA. But we're also going to be working on sage-grouse habitat restoration with the Forest Service and the Wet Meadow Restoration Resilience Project. And we started that last year, and we had a great time, and so we'll actually be revisiting the site we worked at last year near Black Sage Pass, and we're turning that into a sort of hot springs 2-day workday, which will be really fun. And then also we're going to be working with Ashley Home in the Forest Service to shut down illegal user-created routes in the Taylor Park area because those have just kind of spanned out of control. And with the upcoming timber sale, they're expecting that issue to potentially get worse. And so we're really trying to contain those illegal user-created routes that cause erosion and just encourage loss of connectivity on the landscape. So those are the ones we've identified. May, July, August. Or May, July, August, September, sorry. Clarinda.
I'm wondering if you can talk about just the history of the organization that you work for a little bit and your experience coming in kind of as a newcomer to the community and how they accepted you or any challenges you had with that.
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you, and thank you, Ian, for your question as well. So yes, I first learned about HICA actually through a fellow MEM student, Carrie Ann Conroy, because she knew I was interested in environmental law, and she was like, you should check out this organization. They employ some environmental attorneys, and they also advocate for public lands. And as I stated in my presentation, I really didn't have a huge background in public lands, coming from Texas, where they're pretty limited to non-existent. And so with that, I just really, when I introduced myself to them, I did a lot of work just because I wanted to be involved, and I had no intention of being employed by them. I just sort of was like, I just want to do my project with you. And I was very persistent though, as I can be, and then it just so happened that a position opened up with them, and I had a pretty significant administrative background, and what they needed really suited some of my experience, although not fully. And so it was a huge learning experience. I've learned so much even in the past year in terms of my just marketing, so many different areas that I didn't have a ton of experience in, but they've been extremely patient and really have helped me facilitate growth. In terms of their history, they've been around since 1977. Their sort of keystone issue that spurred the beginning of HICA was Red Lady mine, or the potential for a mine on Red Lady in Crested Butte. At the time, they were trying to mine molybdenum, and the community came together, which was then, at the time, High Country Citizens Alliance, and then over time has been renamed to High Country Conservation Advocates. But currently, we work on public lands issues, water issues. The stewardship program is sort of our third tier, and we continue to work and negotiate to ensure that Red Lady does stay mine-free. So, but all in all, the greater mission is really just to protect public lands for future generations. That includes wilderness, the watershed, and I've just been really excited to continue working with them and build on that mission and bring a new perspective, and one that certainly I think is fresh. And I think even though I didn't grow up around public lands, I think that it provided me a really great opportunity to bring some insight that coming from someone who didn't know anything. So yeah, now I know a lot, but thank you. Sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Lizzie Hartson. I'm an environmental scientist, and we're going to take it to state level now. We talked about university and county level, and my project works at the state level, so I'm excited to tell you about it. So what's wrong with this picture? Hands. Want to see hands in the air? What's wrong with it? Dude.
The discoloration of the water.
Yeah. So this was the Gold King mine spill back in 2015. This put the issue of abandoned mines on my radar for the very first time. Basically, there was a blowout at the Gold King mine during remedial activities by a contractor employed by the EPA. It spilled 3 million gallons of acid mine drainage and heavy metals into the Animas River, which is a tributary to the Colorado River. So the important thing to know about this, though, is that it wasn't technically a spill, right? Because when you think of a spill, you think of like an accidental discharge of something that's not going to be into the watershed. This was going into the watershed. You know, there are draining mines throughout Colorado, and this was going to end up in the Animas River. It's just a matter of when and at what volume. And the bad news is there's a lot of sites like this at varying scale, size, and severity throughout Colorado, 23,000, in fact. And, you know, some of them have acid mine drainage. These two are actually near the Gold King mine. Some of them have waste piles that leach heavy metals into the soil. Some of them have mining features that are dangerous to user groups on the land. So this is really a multifaceted issue, and remediation of these sites requires very site-specific evaluations and projects. This is the mechanism of acid mine drainage. I'm not going to get super in-depth in it, but basically what you need to know is there are 4 components involved in acid mine drainage. There's water, oxygen, pyrite, and thermophilic bacteria. Pyrite is a mineral that co-occurs with a lot of mineral deposits, especially here in Colorado, especially in the hard rock sites down in the San Juan Mountains. Basically, there's a chemical reaction that produces acid mine drainage, which then picks up heavy metals more readily from the waste piles that are often right outside the gates of those mines. And if you'd like, I can go more in depth on this in the Q&A session. So remediation of these sites is a skill that's essential to Colorado's sustainability as a headwater state. It's in our economic best interest to maximize our sources of clean water. So that is what my project attempted to do. And we accomplished this through 3 objectives. I launched a collaborative nonprofit with the help of Luke Danielson. And then I completed our very first pilot project. So the first thing we're going to talk about, for some reason this slide doesn't like to advance. It'll happen. There we go. All right, so the nonprofit is the Western Alliance for Restoration Management. And basically it's the first of its kind in that it encourages collaborative opportunities between universities. You know, universities have long done projects on these sites, but we are actually a collaborative entity between Western, Fort Lewis College, and Colorado School of Mines. Those three entities are represented on our board of directors. So they're responsible for steering the direction of our nonprofit. We also have two contracting firms represented, industry experts from Brown & Caldwell and Stantec. And this collaboration is expanded by the existence of our advisory board. So our advisory board basically guides remediation on the sites using best practices, and it really ensures that all stakeholders are involved. So we have the Animas River Stakeholders Group. They're actually the Bonita Peak Community Advisory Group now, but they don't have a logo yet, and that's the logo. Yeah, and we've got our involved agencies. We've got some contracting firms. We've got a local contracting firm, Weston Associates. Trout Unlimited is partnered with us as well. Occasionally, these firms will actually take over parts of our projects as appropriate. So this is a really exciting model. And that brings me to our very first project, the way we applied this model. So the Bonita Peak Mining District once mined gold, silver, lead, and coal. It's located about 4 hours southwest of here, near Silverton, Colorado. And it consists of 48 mining and mining-related sites in that area. The Gold King Mine, which we just talked about, it's right there. The Ben Butler Mine, where I did my project, is near the very top of the watershed. And this is what the site looks like. So you can see that there's two trenches on site. The trenches are basically mine shafts. There's not a lot of underground like tunnel type workings that you would think of, but they are shafts that are very out of place with the surrounding landscape, so that's dangerous for user groups on the landscape because, you know, you've got this rolling alpine tundra and then these sharp drops. One of these shafts is gated off, but this is 200 feet deep, so pretty dangerous stuff. The shafts are flooded with water at alternating times throughout the year. We visited in a drought year and there was still some water sitting on the bottom and in these deeper mine shafts. And then from the trenches, we've got the bulk of the waste rock on site, which is deposited in the east waste pile. There's a smaller waste pile down here, and there's waste rock within the trenches themselves. From these waste piles, we actually have some denuded zones emanating down, and I'm actually going to go to the next slide so you can really get a good look at those. So these denuded zones are coming off of the waste rock. There isn't actually waste rock here. It's metals that have leached out of the waste rock and caused devegetation here. And there's no water actually flowing off this site the way it was in the Gold King mine. It's not a draining site, but these denuded zones are evidence of ephemeral drainage or rain surface water snow melt flowing off the site. Burroughs Creek lies 450 meters south of here. And then there's actually a divide on the site, and then this other trench here drains pretty much directly between these alpine ponds. And previous studies on the site, there was a feasibility study 20 years ago in 1999 by the Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. What a leachate is you take the waste rock, you put some water in with it, and you see what's in that water, basically. It gives you an idea of what pollutants are leaching off the site. It is an experimental procedure, so it's a little different from the water that's actually on site, but it does give us an idea and help us predict what's going on with that waste rock. So highlighted values are above the lowest potentially applicable water quality standard. Those standards are actually the Colorado regulation standards that have been set in place by the Colorado Commission for Water Quality and Colorado Water Quality Control Commission, that one. Those are regulations number 31 and 41 for surface water and groundwater respectively. These, especially these, are orders of magnitude higher than the lowest potentially applicable water quality standard. I have to say potentially applicable for reliability reasons. But yeah, what we're looking at here is some very hot reactive rock on site. This is just one of the samples of the rocks on site. And we hope to expand this with our study. So when we visited the site, we took some water quality measurements on site. Unfortunately, we couldn't do metals analysis on those samples because that takes money, and there's holding times on those. But we did take a few readings. The pH values that you see, these ones are above the lowest potentially applicable water quality standards. And those 4 are actually the ones that are in the mine. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. And what's important to note here is that these 2 are within the high alpine plains, and they are within normal range for water. Groundwater in the United States generally ranges between pH 6.5 and pH 8. So these are actually within the water quality standards, and they're pretty normal, which might indicate minimal impact to those ponds. We really need to do some groundwater studies to know that for sure. But that is some good news. And while we were on site, we collected 20 rock samples. We delineated the 2 trenches, trench 1 and trench 2. What we're basically trying to do here is get some locational ideas of what's going on with this waste rock, so that if we can do any like preferential treatment of the waste rock, like deposit the less reactive rock into the hole first that might be potentially in contact with water, then we'll do that. So we did 20 locationally based rock samples. And what we did next is we wanted to create leachates just like that DRMS study did. We did this in the lab at Whetstone Associates, and we do have the results from that, but the data is not validated yet. I'm not really prepared to show you guys unvalidated data, but this is the pH and the conductivity of those leachates that we generated. We read them in the lab right after we created them. Basically, what you need to know here is on the next slide. There was a significant difference between pH and conductivity between the 2 waste piles. So trench 1, which is the larger one, has lower pH and higher conductivity. So that does indicate some potential for preferential treatment of the waste rock. Hopefully our metals analysis will show other patterns as well and guide our remediation, our capping protocols, which I'm going to get into next. So the collaborative remediation model. I took these results to our advisory board a couple of weeks ago, and I crafted a remediation plan with them in collaboration with the Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. And these are the goals of that remediation plan. So we do want to mitigate those surface hazards that are on site because there might potentially be recreationalists on this site. Part of it does lie on public lands. We also want to mitigate the interaction between the waste rock and the watershed, right? And how we're going to do that is we're planning to just deposit the waste rock back into the trenches. This will accomplish both of those goals. And our leachate data will guide how we cap that rock, how we treat that rock. So the specifics are pending those results, but this is the schedule. This summer, we plan to collect some baseline data on site, get some water quality samples from there and do metals analysis on them, which we didn't get to do last summer. We want to check on the status of those denuded zones, see if the soil is suitable for revegetation. If it's not, we might need to deposit it into the trenches with the waste rock. 2020 or 2021 is the slated time for remediation, and the monitoring phase will continue after that. So the monitoring phase is really exciting because these are future student projects, both here and at Fort Lewis College and School of Mines. Vegetation transects are pretty much a classic like biology student thing to do. I did them as an undergraduate. So these have potential to be undergraduate projects or graduate student projects. It's really scalable to whatever the needs are. So these are some proposed monitoring measures. And that basically just assesses the success of our remediation. If we don't get that good baseline, obviously we don't have anything to compare to. So this summer is going to be really critical to this. And then the monitoring will hopefully guide us in whether we need to go back and maybe retreat the rock that's in the trenches or take other measures. So the future directions. We plan to bid this coming summer on the Ben Butler mine in collaboration with our contracting companies. They do have the liability insurance that we would need to work on a Superfund site. So we would kind of subcontract out with them, and students could potentially be involved as appropriate. But basically, we plan to also assemble a, where is this keeping me right now? We want to get a few of these sites going, basically. We want to have a portfolio of sites, if you will, so that if one site is in the remediation phase and we really can't be involved on site, students have another place to go to learn these on-the-ground skills. And then we also hope to grow our collaborative network, and we are actively doing so. We hope to partner with other schools. Yeah, when I was working on this project over the past year, it seemed blessed with remarkable good luck. I was like, wow, we've really got a good thing going. And then when I went to write the acknowledgement section of my final paper, I realized that it was really the talent and passion and drive of all the people who have contributed to it. So thank you all. Scott Eppner deserves particular mention. He allowed us to use his facilities, his expertise. He professionally reviewed my analysis plan to make sure that it met EPA standards and that it was going to be defensible data for our agency partners. The John and Margie Haley Environmental Project Fund did provide the funding to get those analyses done. ACZ Laboratories provided us with a generous discount, so thank you to them. Yeah, and we are excited for our future as an organization. We've got some references. That data I cited earlier is in there. Are there any questions?
I thought your images were so well done as well. Project as well. I guess my question relates to your learning experience. What was something that really was noteworthy that you are taking away from this experience that you're going to take on to your next job?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah.
So really the exciting thing about WARM is the professional development of the students. And I did not just do like this technical side of things. I also got to help build WARM. I got to sit in on our stakeholder meetings. I got to reach out to a lot of our stakeholders. As a scientist, that's not a skill I get to cultivate very often because, you know, we're sitting behind our desks. So kind of a socially awkward scientist. When I had to make cold calls to people, I had to email people, and I hope that future students will have to make those same, cultivate those same skills because it's totally essential to this sort of work. You know, we have stakeholders involved, we have, you know, different agencies and expertise, and we really want to make sure we're using best practices and generating innovative solutions. So really it's the collaborative skills that were most important to me.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for asking that. Anyone else?
I just wanted to add something. So not only is Lucy a great scientist, she's also a really good graphic artist, and she designed that logo and many other logos for the MEM program.
I did design our logo, yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the structure of WARM and is it a Colorado corporation?
So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our steering committee basically is our board of directors, which has representatives from Fort Lewis School of Mines, Western, and then Stantec and Brown and Caldwell. And then our advisory board kind of guides the remediation side of things. Did you want to know anything specific?
Yes, that speaks. How long did it take you to get from 0 to 501c3?
Several months.
Months? You got to apply back from the government and all that in how many months?
That took us about 2 months.
2 months?
Yeah.
Wow.
The IRS was shut down during part of this time, so.
Wow. And who was the team that filled out the 1023?
That was Todd Jessen in the back over there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it.
So Todd is the first year taking over my project. He actually stepped up to the plate and did that for us.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Hey, so I met a guy who'd worked in a uranium mine near here, and he had claimed that they buried the vehicles because they were hot, is essentially what he was saying. And I believed him, because like he had pictures and is that kind of stuff on your guys' radar as well? Like, there's like bad mines and then there's like really crazy bad mines. Is there a way of like sort of like measuring and figuring out, you know, which sites are like in dire need of, and is there a way of finding that kind of stuff out?
So we're approaching each site on a site-by-site basis, but the sites you're referring to are involved in the drum process, which is basically all the uranium mines in the US have been taken over by the Department of Defense. They're responsible for the remediation, which is a little different from most mine remediation. DRUM stands for Department for the Remediation of Uranium Mines. Yes, something like that. And we are actually in contact with some people from Department of Defense. The site you're referring to might be the Los Ochos mine. We actually took some students out there for a tour last year during the last intensive. But I believe that there's a really big repository out by the Gunnison landfill that is full of tailings that were actually deposited near the Gunnison County Airport. There's a mill out there, and those tailings had actually contaminated 3 wells before they finally remediated that site. Yeah, that's a really big process. But yes, we would like to be involved in some of those sites, and we're in talks with people to see if we can be. Yes?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there were any types of wildlife issues you encountered or anticipate with this. I see Trout Unlimited as a partner. Obviously, water quality is like a key component to some of those wildlife-related issues. Yeah, were there any agencies or other issues related to that?
So the Ben Butler mine is actually under grazing permits, so there are sheep on site. So that's the specifics of that site. We might have to like fence off some areas so that they don't eat our new vegetation. But generally, the main agencies involved are like water quality, trout unlimited, things like that. Thank you all.
Okay, you ready? I'm so grateful to see so many beautiful faces and hearts in this room that completely influenced and inspired this work. Thank you so much for taking the time to come join us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself here so you understand the context of where this project bloomed from. I come from a multi-ethnic, multiracial household. I have worked with many cultures from around the world at this point. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. I'm the descendant of 2 tribes that went through genocide. I grew up in a very beautiful, diverse little town in Northern California. And we had everyone from illegal immigrants from Mexico working alongside our family to LGBT community to very conservative, Confederate flag waving, openly bigoted and racist community members. And they were a part of our community. They absolutely were. And so I was very curious at a very early age to understand perspective and why we are the way we are. Why do we believe ourselves to be a certain way? Why do we produce the cultures that we do? So I have spent my life looking at everything from neuroscience and epigenetic multi-generational inheritance to attachment issues with childhood development to things like gender identity in an effort to understand the drivers behind our beautiful cultures. It's with this background that it then informed me in a conversation one day with an MAM faculty member who had drawn a rudimentary map of Colorado and divided it into 4 quadrants. And they asked me what drove each region, what made it develop as it did. And all I could think was that it was the people. It was the only answer that could come into my head. It was their worldview, their values, their beliefs, their cosmologies, their signifiers. It was their cognitive abilities to see possibility, right? It was their ability to question who they believe themselves to be, who they believe their cultures to be. It was their ability to stand in that humble, discerning openness of making that inquiry into what they don't know that was going to determine the development of that region. I delved heavily then into sustainable development in regards to culture. And what was the research behind it? And what I discovered was, sure enough, in 2012, Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, and UNESCO itself, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, had stated that culture was to be taken into account as the direct driver of sustainable development and proliferation. It was the whole underlying control mechanism. And if we didn't, as a community, take it into account as such, sustainable development and proliferation simply wouldn't occur at all. Dusan exemplifies this really beautifully. This is sort of how we're typically taught to think of culture in relationship to the other pillars of sustainable development, right? But what they're saying now is that it's actually the whole underlying mechanism upon which everything else lies, okay? Dr. Jess Young is my wonderful faculty advisor, and she refers to this as my pizza crust. So everything else is the topping, okay? So Diego's exceptional work in waste is fantastic and has elements of the pizza crust. He's dealing with a lot of pepperoni, right? So we have the propensity as a community to focus on toppings, because that's what we can quantify and measure, and culture is enigmatic. How do we measure this, and what are the ingredients for that pizza crust? And do you know how hard it is to make a pizza crust anyways? And I'm not kidding. But literally, how do you tend culture appropriately to drive sustainable development and not infringe on autonomy, right? Nobody likes that. So, exactly. So I started learning about the sustainability pathways of the built environment. And these are all active pathways that we tend in sustainable development. But what I wanted to know was, sorry, I'm getting used to this sucker. So that's unusual. That was black last night and not now. This says the complex human social infrastructure, for lack of a better term. I was wondering, what were the pathways in the trunk, in the roots, in the soil that we aren't aware of consciously that are actually driving the formation of these beautiful branches, right? Toppings, pizza crust. Okay, so I don't have time to go into all of this. This is about 1.5 years worth of research solid. I'll be publishing over the summer and talk about this more. Are these all? We're gonna see what colors show up, I guess. So I did this on the lens of climate resilience, because at this stage in the game with the climate crisis we are in, we absolutely need to have climate resilience about our cultures. And so I was really looking at the capacity of a socio-ecological system to absorb stresses and maintain function, to adapt, reorganize, and evolve in the face of into more desirable configurations. And I want you to hear this because I want you to understand we're talking about adapting, and then the ability to buckle and to transform into a whole new socio-ecological system. So many of these are well understood in regards to climate resilience. Social capital is considered synonymous with it. These are interpersonal relationships built on trust and reciprocity, right? We need social cohesion. We need each other. We need to feel connected to one another. Community resilience, also essential. It's our ability to function in and respond to an environment that is characterized by crisis, by the unknown, by uncertainty. So I kept asking myself, what are the qualities of the individuals that would be in a community that had high community resilience, right? That's a badass who can fly in the unknown like that in the face of crisis. Adaptive capacity. The biggest hole I found from sustainable development is the lack of assessment of a transformational capacity of a socio-ecological system. We don't actively tend it. We love coming up with quantitative data to go after, but we aren't looking at whether or not the people can actually do it. Can they even mobilize? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a stunning report in October that said we as a global collective now have 12 years before we begin experiencing catastrophic environmental breakdown. We have to be able to mobilize. We can't keep tending topics. So I came up with 3 psychological indicators, 1 sociological indicator, and 1 amalgamation to kind of inform what I would then that would then tell me what the traits were of these qualities. So 4 questions I kind of took forward with myself in this journey was, what are the cultural constructs, beliefs, and values that are impeding transformation of a socio-ecological system at this point? The ones that are right in front of us that we can't see, in our unconscious, in our cultural norms, and quite frankly are often institutionalized because of it. What indicators can be used to assess the transformation capacity then of that socio-ecological system or even the individual? What knowledge do we need, and what is the role of human cognition, perception, and emotion? This is what my background is steeped in, and all I can see is how much it informs everything that we do on this planet. Why wouldn't it be a part of sustainable development? So my opportunity to ground this passion in research came in the form of Western Colorado University's Climate Action Plan. It's about 10 years out of date, and the MEMers, we need people on this. Come talk to me later. We have a carbon neutrality commitment for 2050. My contribution was just foundational at this point. So we started with needing an updated and expanded greenhouse gas emission assessment and a way to assess and create a sustainable culture. Our own exceptional Timon Keller took on a carbon footprint for us and handled the majority of it. And I went forward with creating the other pillar of it, which was a sociological indicator baseline. They were done in tandem. It'll be part of a longitudinal study to assess mitigation and sustainability efforts done on campus in relationship to the indicators within this baseline. And then I designed a program called Culture of Leaders Training Program to improve the indicators, to see if we can actually bump them and to do them fairly quickly. So traits and states for transformation and mobilization, I want you to keep in mind that climate resilience is the resilience of our community. They are not separate, deeply intertwined. I'm only going to talk about a couple of these. I came up with 22. So really introspective people, right? Self-aware, full of self-knowledge, productive coping strategies, readily takes initiative, to things like flexibility and cognition, perception, beliefs, and schemas, ability to act with courage, to plan in a proactive capacity. This takes a certain cognitive ability, right? We need to train people in this. Willingly interdependent with others, people with a sense of equanimity, perseverance, self-reliance, a grace with that existential aloneness that we all deal with, and the ability to be compassionate and empathic, the ability to understand another person's perspective. I can't believe how rarely we actually tend this. This is absolutely vital. We need to bring social fabrics together. So sociological and psychological indicators for the baseline were ended up being composed of 5 sociological and psychological indicators that had 8 scales, 8 subscales, which allowed me to sort of assess and understand what was influencing what. They were cross-cultural and universal. I'm not about infringing our beliefs on other human beings. I do believe we have very clear common human conditions and needs that we absolutely need to thrive. So that's what I went after. These indicators are all deeply interrelated to one another, so that by tending one, I could influence the other. And they were cross-relevant, right? Because to higher education, because Western is my client. So student retention and completion rates are highly correlated to these indicators, as well as things like academic success and my own passion of inclusivity, employee productivity, creativity, and innovation. The sociological indicator survey itself was done on SurveyMonkey, distributed via email, and some classrooms. It was incentivized by 5 $100 gift certificates from the Student Sustainability Fund and from our own student affairs. We had a response rate of 497 out of 3,186. That's the highest response rate to any survey done on campus. The analysis sample ended up being about 425. We had the incomplete indicators assessed as well as some corrupt data. It took about 15 minutes to complete. I've gathered a variety of demographic information, so everything from ethnicity to sexual orientation, transgendered, first-generation students, transfer students. We have a lot of information about these individuals, and it was de-identified data. So the primary role, we ended up having 46 faculty, 55 staff, 9 admin, 256 undergrads, and 53 grads. So I'm only going to share one indicator today. I simply don't have time, but I want you to understand the potential implications of just the one. And this is, so I looked at psychological resilience. This is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, and even significant forms of stress. And these lend to things like a high degree of self-efficacy and self-esteem, increased personal competencies, right? Things like perseverance, resourcefulness, higher acceptance of self and life, adaptability, flexibility, action-oriented approach, healthier relationships, greater community involvement, strengthening effects of stress. How great is this? Somebody gets stressed out and they actually get tougher. So, scoring level. We had a faculty mean, this is based on the instrument I used, of between 135 faculty, staff, and admin, 135 to 140, which put them at a moderately high level of resilience. Undergrad and grad, 128 to 126, which is a moderately low level of resilience. One way ANOVA revealed there is significant effect in the primary role for psychological resilience, and post hoc showed that faculty is greater than in psychological resilience than undergrads, and staff is also greater than undergrads. So I found this ironic and fantastic. I set out to understand the transformation capacity of a socio-ecological system. And this tells me that we actually have an exceptional community that's primed for transformation. So if we, yes, while low to moderately low psychological resilience means these students aren't going to handle are going to be more likely to have emotional distress, less likely to cope with stress well, more likely to have psychological breakdowns. Okay, the thing is about this, if you move out of the concept reality, this is the first thing I teach my students. If you move out of a concept reality of good, bad, right, wrong, blame, shame, and guilt, and instead you understand that resilience is a multidimensional indicator, right? It's created by your genetics, your epigenetics, in utero development, childhood development, and formative years in the adult. Then you're going to understand another way we increase resilience is through something called post-traumatic growth. Through falling apart, through shattering, through our own becomings, which is something we don't nearly honor enough within our culture. We stigmatize it and we hide it. We don't know how to be witness to it, and nor do we know often as individuals how to facilitate it through our own selves. I want you to understand that I'm going to finish with this really quickly. 1 minute. All right, so culture of leaders. This was 35 participants, 5 weeks, 10 hours of training, minimal homework. And these are the titles of the weeks, the heading of each week that we went through to explore. And the data that has come back is not statistically powerful enough to draw conclusions yet. I'm in the midst of diving into Bayesian statistics. What I can tell you is that we had an undergraduate mean jump from 128 to 141, which would put them on par with faculty. But I need to explore that more, so it is initially very intriguing. I want you to take away from this more than anything is that this mobilization and this transformation is going to begin with you. We have societal norms and stigmas we cannot see that are directly impeding the growth of the individuals around us and shutting people down. I truly do believe this is fundamentally a part of the transformation that has to go and occur in regards to culture, and that the resilience of the beings around you is the resilience of our community and is our climate resilience. Thank you. I know I'm out of time, but like this was a symphony of individuals here that just blew my mind and my heart, and a lot of you showed up today. This was a dream and a lifetime in the making, and I'm taking it onwards from here. So thank you dearly for being here. Rich.
So based on your results you showed at the very end,
yes,
I'm wondering, do we need people other than faculty who are at a higher level of resiliency to help develop, or do you think that within our existing base we can, within this kind of enclosed system, we can lift ourselves up? Or do we need an external that can help us to get higher?
It's a beautiful question, Rich. And I would say it's not any direction at this point. So these indicators, once embodied, they matter more at a high level embodiment if people are here longer, right? Because faculty and staff, that level of embodiment is how we are as social creatures will be picked up by the students who come and go. That being said, I'm a student here who's here for a minimal amount of time. I've mentored many, many, many students here at this point, which has been a total joy. And I knew that was something I could give and bring to the community. It only takes a moment in some cases to nurture one another into a state of authenticity that allows them to be present to what is shutting them down from their potential, from taking action. You all have that capacity every single day. This can't simply fall on faculty and staff and admin.
How do you think you encourage total transparency and authenticity through these surveys? It's very easy to look at the survey and say, oh, that's me. And then kind of lie to yourself and get a result that says you're more resilient or less resilient than you actually are.
Yeah, well, in regards to, can you ask that one more time?
How do you think you can encourage people to be totally transparent on these benchmark surveys?
Sure. So this was de-identified. People made up a code based on 3 pieces of information so that I would have no way of tracking them down as to who they actually are. That, I think, dramatically increased our response rate. My participants did have to give me their codes directly linked to their names, but I would have to look it up. And so I didn't directly. But they knew this was all through the IRB process. Yes.
So you had a slide, it was kind of before you talked about the survey, where you had a list of traits on resilience.
Yeah.
And you kind of highlighted a couple of them.
Yeah.
So it's before this slide.
Oh, you mean on the 22 that I wanted for, so these are, this is for everything that would support the composite of those states and traits in the tree.
Yeah.
The sustainability pathways, yeah.
How did you determine these traits?
I'm nuts. So it's okay, I'm really comfortable with it at this point. So this tree, when you talk about the quality of what community resilience is, what collective efficacy is, what are the underpinnings of a social capital that is working really beautifully, or social cohesion and values and beliefs that inform an ecological worldview, all of these produce remarkably universal traits within individuals that has that sense of deep interconnectedness to one another, to the biophysical realm, to community. And from there, based on my past experiences, and by testing these apart across 1.5 years of climate resilience research, came up with indicators I thought were appropriate and checked with other researchers as well. Transformation capacity is a frontier in climate research right now. It's exploding.
We have a distance student that
Human.
I think is unmuted. Genevieve?
Yeah.
Oh, Genevieve.
Hi, Aurora.
Hi.
This was really exciting to be part of. What is your next step to move this work forward? Because it's so important and necessary.
Yeah, that's a juicy question. So this, the curriculum itself was nominated for the Inclusive Excellence Award by our faculty and staff and our student members. I am a firm believer that this needs to be, and it was recommended because we have qualitative researches or surveys done as well, that this needs to be curriculum. It needs to be a full semester course that enables people to step into this level of leadership. We have a strat plan that says we're here for global leadership. We talk about creating agents of change. That has to have a real backing in these types of indicators in my mind. I'll take this on to a PhD, and I have several institutes and researchers actually in the UK who are really excited about this and about the concept of institutionalizing a training program like this that's transformational learning that's alongside academic learning.
So many comments and questions for you, Aurora, so I'm gonna have to individually talk to you, but
Okay.
I just want to say, wow, I'm inspired and impressed. Just wow.
We have 18 people online, as well as the people in the room.
I guess now's the time for our other questions. Flynn?
Yeah, so one, great job on all of your projects. That was just phenomenal, and I think you guys have just elevated the bar even more.
I have to totally stop you because I did not acknowledge this beautiful human being and Dr. Jess Young nearly enough. I hadn't had them by my side, I would not be the being that I am, giving to you all, and that wouldn't have come through me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, I really appreciate that, but you really did, you really did a great job. So my question kind of is, thinking about all of your projects and the ways that you're making change, there's a lot of things that don't, and obviously I'm coming from a psychological perspective, but that don't like necessarily at face value look like the change you want to see. So for example, with Diego, success in his world is us not seeing litter everywhere and not having a bunch of waste. And similar to like the vaccine issue, people are not seeing diseases and then they're losing sight of how we got there. And so if we think about like with waste, think about like that, once he starts being successful, it's actually gonna look like the lack of something. And so much about what we're trying to do with environmental issues is to produce the lack of problems, right? And so there's things that we're gonna see less as we're successful. In the case of Aurora's project, thinking about these things that are very urgent, like we have 12 years before like these catastrophic climate things are gonna start happening. That's one of the reasons, and that kind of that sense of urgency and panic is what drives focusing on the toppings, because the toppings are what are gonna like destroy everything, right? And so how do we get people to slow down to think more in depth and with longevity about things that have this great sense of urgency to them? And the same applies for Lizzie and Michelle's project as well, but you guys bookending it, Diego and Aurora, kind of like booking this whole story across the 4 of your projects. What do you guys think about how to accomplish that, how to kind of make people stop and work on resiliency while environmental topping problems are still unfolding, right?
I can launch. I'm gonna stand up so I can see your faces. So this is part of the way I came at it intending. I truly do believe we need a neurocognitive approach at this point of understanding how our minds are working. When I work with neuroscientists on this, I work with transformational coaches and business leaders. And a lot of what I'm seeing, that longitudinal, that is really based in the right hemisphere. A lot of the qualities we see in Western civilization are based in the left hemisphere dominant brain. I kid you not, this is the cutting edge research out of functional MRIs. This needs to be on our consciousness because we can't see the paradigm shift enough yet. We're too focused in a value-based system that likes quantitative, likes linear, likes didactic details, doesn't see big picture. These are all left brain qualities, I kid you not. So it's these types of conversations I had with my students that forced everybody to kind of stand back and go, wait, how is my brain designed? How am I using it? What do I need to step into in order to see the bigger picture? I do believe we need to train leaders at this point with these abilities, and that's what we're seeing.
Does anyone else have any
Oh,
comments
yes.
to that question?
I hope that.
I think I understand the question right, but to me, I guess it was more about the values, right? I'm trying to instill that zero waste isn't a problem of waste, it's that affects our livelihoods in all aspects. And so to me, people who care about their family's health or public lands or whatever it is, I think that as long as people's lives are as long as their needs are being met, I guess I should say, and it's aligned with their values, then I think those problems.
Well, here's the other thing I think maybe you're touching on is that we have a lot of cultural sort of cultural concepts that are really binding and keeping us from actually being nourished, thriving human beings, right? And there is a value shift that does need to occur for us to do this that will actually increase our sense of nourishment, satisfaction, and connection. And I think once people get a hit of that, they know to aim towards that. But we have a lot of societal programs running in our beautiful brains right now that say that material or social media or that provide a lot of numbing and distraction from an emotional journey that absolutely is a critical part of your development, your wisdom, and living with a paradox that can bring you closer to communities around the world. We need to train people how to do this because you don't know what you don't know. And you have layers of programming with which you're looking at the world. If you don't understand that reality is incredibly subjective based upon the layers that inform your identity, you're not going to be able to see solutions.
I think to round out that question, unless Lizzie also has comments on her project specifically, but on the stewardship issue in Gunnison County, I think the advantage to working on stewardship Gunnison County is the deep sense of place that we know exists here and the connection of the community to public lands. So I think in many ways that will help bolster the efforts and sustain them over time because it is visible, we see those changes, people are out on the land to a higher degree than maybe say in cities or in other locations. But I think the other component of that and a necessary component that I think all of our projects hit on is education, right? Because without an education or an educated community on any of these issues, the community won't really have the knowledge, the tools, the power to really work towards those goals or even understand why we're working towards those goals. And so at least in terms of the program I designed, I felt like that was just, it had to be there. It completely complemented the physical action, and then inspiring a new generation, changing habits, culture that's really ingrained in how we operate day to day. So that's what I would say to that. Thank you for that question.
So I would say that in terms of mine remediation, it's really not, when you go and talk to these communities, they don't want their mining legacy to disappear. It's something that they're proud of. It's something that's part of their foundation. And I can't speak for all of them, but there are certainly members of the Bonita Peak Community Advisory Group and members of people that go to the San Juan Mining Reclamation Conference who are for sustainable mining. And these innovative solutions can be applied to those types of projects as well. I'm really glad Aurora also spoke to the shattering and remaking of communities, because that's often the case with these mining communities as well, you know, that they have been shattered by the closure of mines economically. Luke and I gave a presentation about that last year, and have had to remake themselves and sort of hold on to parts of that identity while remediating parts of it as well. So it's not necessarily just a problem. It's not really that black and white. But yeah, I'm glad you asked that and called that to attention.
So as I was listening to all of you guys talk, I thought about where it could fit in. I know you mentioned curriculum, Aurora, but even the stewardship and mining, like you just mentioned, as it's a cultural aspect, and the waste diverting, everyone living residentially as zero waste as possible. Sounds like a really and it does sound like something that give us tangible things that we can take control over in our own lives that we can work on. So could any of these have some place in like preschool or elementary school to try to get these tiny little fundamental ideas into kids' brains, as far as understanding, like, you can be a land steward and you can approach nature in your own backyard. You don't need to travel to Yosemite and all that. But at the same time, in order to get a more broader sense of the world around you and different kinds of people, it is worth it to take the time and take up the resources and travel all the way across to a different place just to just open your mind to different ways of doing things that you can marry between your individual experience at home and also the way people do things in their own homes that are different from yours. But how do you think we can find that balance between like personal, like really small scale personal at home versus large scale interactions between the larger society? That is a huge question. It took me a long time to come up with it. I hope it makes sense.
No, it does. Isn't that like the ultimate? I mean, isn't that what everybody's asking daily? What is the individual and how does it spread like wildfire? That was at the heart of what I was looking at. And I think that, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could talk about it from, you know, they are from what we teach in a young capacity, but I also think it's the passions that you embody and what you share and the knowledge you share. And do it with a sense of invitation. I think that's the other thing I'd like to see for our community more than anything, is that I think we can shut people down with the panic or the urgency or with the indoctrination. I think we can, quite frankly, lovingly I say this, be horribly arrogant. And there are a lot of beautiful communities out there, and I've worked with a lot of different political beliefs out there, that if you open to a new way of being in community, you can pretty much humanize and connect across anything, because this is good for all of us. But if you're out there to shove it down people's throats, it won't. But share your passion and show up for people. And share your passion and show up for people. To the question about integrativeness on a level for younger students, absolutely necessary. The research shows that all sorts of environmental education and getting students outside is critical to development, to communication, and just benefits youth in so many different ways. In terms of your bigger question of how do we balance this like call to global action, I think the biggest lesson I've learned in MEM and through my project is when I came into this program, guns blazing, you know, gonna change the world and do everything,
I think the most important lesson was that you can actually have a much greater impact at a local scale because you're able to know the community, get to know the community. And so to give someone else some more time to answer, I believe in the local approach more than the global, more than ever.
So the scale of these kinds of projects does seem pretty small at first glance when you're looking at the scale of the problem, right? You're just looking at this one tiny site. There's 48 of them just in the Bonita Peak Superfund site. But when you think about these remediation projects, you're increasing the carbon storage capacity. Thank you for asking the question.
I'll talk to you guys later.
Yes.
Okay, I feel like Diego needs to be knighted. I feel like Diego needs to be knighted. We actually get master's degrees. Sorry, Diego. Woo! So please join me in congratulating 4. Wow, there's 4 this time. New masters in environmental management. So,